Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code, OmniPoke. A couple of weeks ago, I did my first impressions of the Night Wanderer cards, as well as a deeper dive into Dusknoir, one of the most exciting cards coming out from the new set. There's actually one more crucial card that we have to talk about in the context of the World Championships, and this isn't a card that's currently out in Japan, so we actually have no context of how powerful this card is going to be until we get into the World Championships itself, because it's actually going to come in the form of a promotional card in our Shrouded Fable ETBs, as well as a blister pack promo, and that is going to be this basic Pecharunt. Now, the Pecharunt has an ability, Toxic Subjugation. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, put 5 more damage counters on your opponent's poisoned Pokemon during Pokemon checkup. So instead of the usual 10 damage of poison, you will now deal 6 ticks. But of course, this is an ability, so on turn 1 going first, you can already be initiating a prize race or prepping some damage onto some multi-prize Pokemon, even if you've gone first. So today we're going to be talking all about the new Pecharunt. It's a dark type with 80 hit points and obviously a basic. It has 1 retreat cost, and as well as that very powerful ability, there's the Poison Chain attack for dark and colorless. You deal 10 and then your opponent's active is poisoned, and during their next turn that Pokemon can't retreat. So effectively you can just force a Poison Chain as a 2 energy attack. It's essentially a 2 for 60, not all that powerful, but at least you have the upside of preventing retreat. This could come up in random panic situations, especially if you're trying to trap something, buy time alongside Iono and whatnot. Maybe it's reasonable. But for the most part, the thing that I'm most interested in here is that we can deal so much damage even on the first turn going first. That's what sets this card apart from other early pressure attackers, you know, like Morpeko, like Cramorant, these sorts of things that can get you rolling in the game. Simply aren't as fast as Pecharunt. Going first now is genuinely a huge deal because you could simply donk low hit point Pokemon, especially when we have the means of going up to 100 damage with poison on the first turn going first with the combination of Perilous Jungle and Radiant Hisuian Sneasler. It's a bit of a combo, but this can get you to a poison tick of 10 damage counters, which is absolutely insane. There's a very simple way of getting to 7 damage counters, and that's either or the Sneasler or the Perilous, getting the Pecharunt in the active, and then using Brute Bonnet with an energy booster capsule attached to it to poison both active Pokemon. So sure, Pecharunt's going to take some chip damage, but if you're using this to donk, or even just to take a single prize on an evolving Pokemon, an early setup basic, that sort of thing, it's absolutely insane. And we have so many Pokemon in the format right now, around that sort of 60 and 70 hit points, that I think it's going to be really crucial to add in a damage buff to this poison to make the most out of that Pecharunt and really start initiating a prize race very, very early on in the game. I think the only cards really comparable right now would be like Iron Valiant decks potentially, but of course those decks are even more combo orientated than this, which is a 4-card combo to deal 70 damage, sometimes a 5th if you have to get Pecharunt active, whereas the Valiants need, you know, 3 or 4 Valiants and all those switching cards on top of that to achieve the same combo, and at the same time you take up more bench space and are full of 2 prize Pokemon, whereas this is all single prizes, taking up less bench space and requiring less deck space overall as well, giving you more of a coherent strategy alongside this early aggressive poison package. Also just wanted to note that yes, we are talking about a combination of cards here, needing Bonnet, needing a tool, needing likely Sneasler, but sometimes the jungle. If that is going to be your goal to get that initial prize going, or just to simply win the game, we can really pad out our deck with a lot of early game cards to help us get over that line. We have both Squawkabilly and a turn 1 supporter option in Carmine now, that even if we go first, we can draw an extra 5 cards. We know we have Trekking Shoes, we know we have Forest Seal Stone. There's even more outlandish card draw options like Gutsy Pickaxe and Toolbox, but I don't think we really need to go down that rabbit hole to make these combos work. I feel like for space and just keeping a coherent deck, 60 cards, rather than going all in on a potential Pecharunt donk, keeping enough cards to have a remaining strategy for after turn 1 is probably going to be valid, but these cards just generally are good. They're consistency cards, they're draw cards, so never a bad thing to have a decent number of these within your deck to increase the odds of that Pecharunt play, whilst also just cycling through your deck and getting your other objectives of the turn sorted. Of course, it's also worth noting that within the Shrouded Fable set, we are also gaining the Binding Mochi tool that says the attacks of your poison Pokemon deal 40 more damage to your opponent's active. So, in effect, if we're building this poison deck, Brute Bonnet also gets way stronger because you're self-poisoning your own active Pokemon with this toxic powder. Effectively, with that tool, with either the Sneasler or the Perilous Jungle, this poison package with Mochi can be an effective plus 70 damage with whatever you're attacking with, which, as you'll see in a moment, is going to make the math so much smoother on some of the attacking threats that I think benefit most from this new combo. So there are 3 existing and 1 completely brand new attacking archetype that I think is born out of the Pecharunt promo. The first one is just breathing life into Roaring Moon EX. We know this card is powerful, it's seen play in all sorts of iterations throughout the sets it's been legal, and really it's kind of just had to play the best single prizes it's had available, be it the Morpeko to have a nice free retreat option and a bit of chip damage, or that Roaring Moon option, which again is like a slightly bulkier Pokemon, but you have to lean into the deck by having lots of ancient cards. Whereas now I think we can quite happily play Pecharunt, especially because we don't have to commit any energy attachments to that Pokemon, meaning that we can more freely attach to our Roaring Moon to keep up the pressure with multiple Pokemon. Klawf is also a really interesting one. Obviously, since we lost the Hisuian Electrode, this hasn't been so much of a deck, but still has achieved a few results here and there. And actually, in the most recent NAIC, in the junior division, Klawf Cramorant did make a top 8, and you really do have to do backflips to make that Cramorant work. You have to play 4 Colress, 4 Vacuum, and hope for the best. So, when we're already playing the poison of Brute Bonnet and Sneasler in the Klawf deck already, the Pecharunt is such an easy card to slot in, and we gain spaces back from the mini Lost package we had to play previously. Conkeldurr is also a hilarious one. This has seen a bit of play in Japan already. That Gutsy Swing damage output is pretty tempting, but I think it gets way better with Binding Mochi, and I'll get into that when we see the list itself. But also having an early pressure attacker that doesn't commit you to your stage 2 every single turn of the game is absolutely enormous. And then finally, the sort of poster archetype of the set, the Okidogi with Pecharunt and Janine's Secret Technique. I've initially been quite harsh on this archetype, but the more I've seen the Pecharunt package, the more I see the potential here, where simply by having an early single prize option, especially if you go first now with this archetype, you can get slightly ahead on energy attachments whilst pressurizing either damage output for poison or taking prizes immediately. And when you're playing an aggressive, low to the ground, basic attacking deck, initiating the race is terrifying for all these setup builds. One of the other things that is crucial to point out about this early pressure from Pecharunt is that your opponent cannot use Unfair Stamp against you, because they can only activate Unfair Stamp if a knockout occurred during our last turn, rather than during Pokemon Checkup. So unlike the early pressure pokes of Lost Zone Box or Raging Bolt archetypes, we can be initiating that race and have no fear of completely losing our hand, making it not only the fastest potential means of aggression, but also the safest. Let's start with my concept for Roaring Moon, and this is the only list that is choosing to use the Perilous Jungle Stadium card. I believe that Radiant Greninja is just far too important in a deck like this, because we need to pitch so many Darkness Energy, not only for the Dark patch, but also for the Professor Sala's Vitality. So I do think the Perilous plus Greninja combo is better in this case than the potential Pokestop plus Radiant Hisuian Sneasler package, and that's mostly because you can't simply make a 1-to-1 split. By going Pokestop, you then have to play things like Palpad, potentially have some more Pokemon recovery cards in the deck. So I do think this is probably the most space efficient option we have, and that's why I've gone down the jungle route. Not only does the Perilous Jungle improve our damage output with that Pecharunt, so we can effectively Toxic Subjugation KO on these 70 hit point basics, but it actually makes our Calamity Storm a much better option as well, because at the very least it means you don't have to Frenzy Gouge into Raging Bolts if you can have that extra poison tick from Perilous Jungle, and at the same time, just generally, Brute Bonnet is good for Roaring Moon EX, so you don't have to gouge into Iron Hands anymore. Previously, we would play cards like Emergency Jelly just on the off chance we can have it on the right turn. Now we just get to play a fairly thick count of the ancient boosters, and it makes more sense here. Admittedly, it does take up a decent amount of space to fit in the Pecharunt, Bonnet, and 3 booster capsule, and with a lack of Greninja plus Pokestop, this may be slightly slower in some regards to previous Roaring Moon builds you've seen in the past, but let's not forget that we're saving energy attachments by using Pecharunt. We have even more single prize attacking options because Bonnet can also chip in, and we can initiate the prize race a turn earlier by going first now. Moving on to the Klawf deck, I was heavily inspired by the junior top 8 list, but I have made some changes. Of course, you don't have to play Chorus's Experiment anymore. We get to play some new supporter cards, actually. The Chorus's Tenacity is actually a really interesting one here, allowing us to grab a Stadium as well as an Energy card, and of course, this does allow Special Energy, so we have even more access to DTE. Because of this new supporter coming in as a 2 count, I've gone a little bit wacky on the Stadium split. Artisan is obviously great because we need to get early Pecharunts, Bonnets, and probably Bidoof. The Townstorm can also chip in as a consistency specialty option, because now we can go Ultra Ball for the fish for Colress for Town Store for Forest Sealstone and Double Turbo, or Jet Energy if we're looking to get Pecharunt into the active. Clorf is a massive beneficiary of the Binding Mochi tool as well here. Typically, Unhinged Scissors does 170 base with Double Turbo attached, but we can gain an additional 30 damage with the Sneasler and Brute Bonnet. But with the plus 40 from Binding Mochi, Clorf is now actually able to hit 240 with the Poison Tick included, so we're actually able to uptrade into all of the basic EXs in format, so it's become a much bigger threat. To incorporate the Luminion package, I have put a Collapse Stadium in the list as well. I think because we will want Luminion in play sometimes, and Pheasantipity in other situations, it makes a good amount of sense here. Rather than having Squawkabilly in the deck, I'm going for the Luminion Carmine route, because Carmine is less dead throughout the entire game, and the Luminion gives us that Town Store Forest Sealstone backwards value from the Colress. I don't necessarily think this is going to be a ridiculous consistency turn 1 Pecharunt, but just giving you those off turns where you don't have to use Clorf is fantastic. You have to ration your double turbos for the situations where they are perfect. And you can just allow Pecharunt to deal with the evolving basics in the early game. Moving on to two of the unproven archetypes then, we have the Conkeldurr. So that Gutsy Swing doesn't require any energy, so you are looking at a 0 energy attacking deck. This is such a fun one to play, even now online. I do think it gets way better with Pecharunt and Binding Mochi, but I have been engine testing with this deck, and it's not as bad as it looks, I promise you. And that's simply because we do gain so much space by not having to play energy cards in the list. In Japan right now, a number of these lists are playing Fighting Energy just so you have the Tantrum attack option from the Conkeldurr itself, which should just show how much better having a Pecharunt in the deck is going to be, because the deck is yearning for like finishing off style attacks or early game presence. Again, we get to use that high artisan count and lots of ball search. And once again, the Binding Mochi is an insanely good math fixer for Conkeldurr. Gutsy Swing could already get to 280 with Bonnet Sneasler, but now the Mochi can actually save you bench space in certain instances, or push you over the line for even Pokemon with resistance like Lugia V-Star. And it means that Conkeldurr can actually cleanly KO a Dragapult. We're 10 off the Charizard unfortunately, but it does show how insane of a beat stick this Conkeldurr is. And then finally, we have Okidogi featuring that Pecharunt once again. Thanks to the Pecharunt EX, we should have no problem trying to get that turn 1 Pecharunt into the active position, but we of course still need to get that Bonnet capsule combo, so there is still a good amount of stuff to be searched here. Comparing it to that Roaring Moon deck, we are sacrificing the Radiant Greninja, but of course our energy acceleration supporter, the Janine, gets these energies from the deck rather than from the discard pile, so there's a bit less synergy with Greninja in this 60. So we don't have to play the heavy Vessel Greninja package that you'll often see in Roaring Moon. Instead, we actually have Super Rod to try and reload some energy, maybe in a late game situation, and give us a small Pokemon reload as well. Okidogi can actually reach 330 damage, the Mochi pushes us up to 300, and the Bonnet Sneasler combo pushes us up to 330, so Okidogi can KO Charizards. So there's a decent chance that I undersold this archetype when comparing it to Raging Bolt, because unlike that deck, we can take early pressure prizes without the fear of Stamp, and in the right circumstances, we can reach those one-hit KOs into those Stage 2 EXs. Take all of these lists with a grain of salt. I have just been in the lab theorying them out and still thrashing out those final counts. But I do hope this gave you some interesting ideas around the new Pecharunt card. I do think it's a very powerful one. I hope I made a case for it here today. And I'm really excited to see what you come up with these new poison packages. This Pecharunt promo actually reminds me back in 2016, my first World Championships, when there was an ETB promo, a Shaman EX actually, which completely countered Trevenant at the World Championships, and actually did have a profound impact on that World's metagame. So don't be sleeping on the promo Pecharunt. It's a card that we definitely have to take into consideration when preparing for the World Championships. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.